are interested in community gardens. And I'm going to tell you what works and what makes a community garden fail. Because I think if you have that knowledge going in, your chance of success and sustainability are much higher. And I travel all over the state. I've seen all different kinds of community gardens. And I want to start by showing you just a couple to give you an idea of what is possible out there. This is in Savannah. This is the Victorian District Garden. This garden has a garden manager, and it's she actually gave me the tour. She will touch base with all the gardeners, make sure that their plots are being worked. She is the liaison for the association, very well organized, and everyone in her garden loves her. So her garden plots are always full. This is actually in Decatur. This is Toby Grant Manor. And Toby Grant is a totally different population. This is actually Section 8 housing. You can see around the perimeter of this garden that's fenced in. And the DeKalb Housing Authority worked with the Atlanta Food Bank to create this garden. It's a community garden for Toby Grant Manor. As you can tell by the raised beds, their population is what? Older, right. So they don't want to bend down. So they accommodate their gardeners by building the raised beds. Each bed has a number, and the county provides water for them. Before this garden came here, this area was riddled with crime. And a lot of the people that lived in these homes, the majority of them are older, they lived alone, and they did not know their neighbors. So terrible tragedies would happen and no one would know. No one helped anybody, everyone had their doors locked. Most of these people can't drive, they have to ride a bus, they lived in fear. So this garden wasn't created to beautify anything, and it wasn't really created for people to raise food. It was created to make a safer environment. Community gardens make safer environments. That is researched, that is a true statement. So what has happened over time is these neighbors got to know each other. They want to know how your collards look better than my collard greens. They get to working together. They actually have a Thanksgiving, they all eat together, and they harvest together. They learn who's sick, whose grandson's visiting, who needs a ride to the hospital. They share meals together. Crime has gone down. The place is a happier vibe, and the residents really enjoy living there. So a community garden is not just about what's grown. As a matter of fact, that is really a small part of what changes when a community garden is established. This garden also has a garden manager. Many gardens rotate who the garden manager is. She has been the garden manager since it started. Her name is Mrs. Bates, and she makes sure that everybody's garden plot's being worked. If someone's garden plot hasn't been worked in a while, she'll go knock on their door. She actually will make sure that the county is providing what the county says they are, and she loves giving tours of her garden. So this is another garden, another example of a successful community garden. This is Green Meadows Community Garden. It's a little closer. It's actually on Dallas Highway in Cobb County. This garden has 50 raised bed plots here. It is a joint venture from Parks and Rec and Master Gardeners. So Parks and Rec had the land and they wanted to do something positive with it, and the Master Gardeners in Cobb County felt this was a good area for a community garden. So they built it. There's a fence around it. They hold classes there and workshops there. They actually have bees on the property. And this garden has been around a while, so this doesn't all happen the first year. But they actually have a bluebird trail attached to the garden. One of their master gardeners is a bluebird expert, and they have documented the rise of bluebird population in Cobb County and attributed it to his part of this garden. So gardens can be used for many, many things. They have a garden manager and a garden committee. They have their plots for a small fee. They have regular meetings, and they belong to the Cobb County Community Garden Association, where their garden manager can actually go to a county-wide meeting to find out things about if they have grants available, any kind of seeds for free, that type of thing. The gardeners work hard here. They do a very good job, but like most community gardens, over half of them knew nothing about gardening when they started. And that's important to know and important to hear. So they handle that by offering classes and workshops on site. Now the master gardeners help with this, but be clear, they're not digging holes or hauling soil or planting plants. They are there as educators and advisors and maybe help get started with the organizing. So those are 3 examples of 3 totally different gardens with totally different populations, with some similarities in need, but some differences in need, but they all have something in common. As Paulding County grows, you want more community gardens, you need a land use agreement. From my experience in working around the state, Parks and Rec land is great. That's the best land because it is the Parks and Rec, it's county owned or city owned depending on your situation, and it's going to stay there. The chances of you getting kicked off of it are pretty slim. But if you have a corner or somebody is letting you use their land, you definitely want to get a land use agreement. And basically, and I'm not a lawyer, so if you felt you needed a lawyer, that would be something you'd want to do. This is from the American Community Garden Association website, and this is just a basic land use agreement. It basically just tells you, as a gardener, that you need to know if the land is going to be for sale. And it also talks about who is responsible if somebody gets hurt on the property. The garden manager does things like figure out, is somebody paid their plot money? Is that person tending their plot? If you find out after you develop your rules that somebody's neglectful of their plot and has to be removed from their plot, the garden manager gets to do that dirty work with the backing of the rest of the gardeners. Now, a garden manager on a small garden like this, one person may be good enough, and it may be that you rotate every year who your garden manager is. But on a bigger garden, like the Green Meadows garden, you probably need a group, a board. And maybe you assign duties. Maybe somebody's duty is to collect the money for the plots, make sure they're up to date on the dues that needs to be paid. Somebody may get the really fun job of planning events. Because even if you're growing a garden, especially like the one y'all are talking about, in a really great park, you want to have events there. And events are great for a couple of reasons. One, they draw the gardeners together. Maybe you have a master gardener come out and teach a workshop on, please don't grow your tomatoes so close together. Or how to grow squash and deal with squash bugs, or something horticultural. Or maybe you just want to have a gathering where you are sampling what each other's grown. Maybe you want to have an open house where you invite all of the people, all of your public servants, like your EMT workers or your police officers. And I always advise doing that because you want those people to know that your garden is there and where it is. That way, if you have an incident, they already know where you are, or they might just drive by a little more often if they see that beautiful space and you've invited them into your space. So if you have either a garden manager or a group of garden people running the garden, you want somebody that plans events. The more people that know you're there, the more people are willing to do things like donate soil or donate seeds or maybe even sponsor an event there. So some garden manager tips for success, because what happens is people argue over garden plots. Someone stole my tomatoes and I think he did it. Somebody sprayed in here and they weren't supposed to and now I've got herbicide damage. You touch my stuff. Right? It happens like kindergartners. So the garden manager has to be tactful and kind. They have to communicate well. If you have a way to communicate with your gardeners, like through email, maybe a weekly tip sheet, how's everybody doing? Now's the time to plant carrots type of thing. You also could have a wonderful bulletin board in your garden that is glass encased, that is waterproof. And you can put notices up there, like found some gloves, somebody left their gloves. But finding a way to communicate with all the gardeners is essential. So the garden manager needs to be a good communicator. Here she also has to be a good listener because they're going to get an earful. They're going to get a vent My tomatoes were here yesterday, they're missing. I don't know, but somebody took them. And that person had been looking at my tomatoes for 3 weeks, so I know that's the person that took them. And so you just have to smile and let that person vent and then be able to calmly address the situation, right? So a garden manager needs to be a good listener. And they have to have respect for every gardener. You're going to have gardeners who have been growing food for a lot of years and maybe don't want a big farm. They want the community and planting only what they and their wife will eat or whatever. And then you're going to have the new gardeners. But those new gardeners are going to be a little reluctant, maybe a little shy, but they need to be respected too. You got to hash the rules out before anybody gets a plot. And the pesticide is the #1 thing that needs to be addressed. Another thing, what about work days for the communal areas? Community gardens have plots and they have walkways. Who's responsible for weeding the walkways? Many gardeners will say we have 4 work days a year. It's mandatory that you attend 2 of them. Or they have you sign up for this month or this week. Garden beds 2, 4, 6, and 8 are in charge of getting all that cleaned up. Because if you don't do that, if you don't have some communal work, if you start having weeds growing in the walkways and those weeds make seeds, what happens? They wind up in your plots. So you have to think about the communal work days. Hours of operation. Can anybody come anytime? What about if Joe's going on vacation? How does he manage his plot while he's gone? So can you have a situation where he says so-and-so can get stuff from my plot while I'm gone, a vacation type of arrangement? Because if you have tomatoes that are hanging there and they're getting rotten, you're going to attract what? Rats and things you don't want in the garden. Do you allow music? If so, what type? And then dogs. You know, my feeling is no dogs, because even though we all love our dogs, do we want our dogs in the food we're going to be eating? Or would you want somebody's dog coming in your plot if you didn't have a dog? Right? So you have to be really creative and you have to think kind of outside the box when you make up your rules. I like bees. I'm not scared of bees, and those of us who are beekeepers know that you're not going to get stung by a bee unless you're at their hive. But if you have them in your community garden, you got a lot of issues. You got to think about liability. What if a kid decides to get in there and kick it over, and then that kid's going to get stung? And that could be a big issue. The community gardens that I know that have them actually have enough area that they're out of sight, really, and they don't let a lot of people know where they are, and that seems to work pretty well. Realize how serious the rules are and how they need to be developed before the first plot is in the ground, and you have to stick to them. And so your garden manager and your committee come up with the rules from the get-go. Now, one of the things I think is interesting about living in Georgia is that we can grow food all year long. What I have found is that community gardeners are tired. And by the end of the year, at the end of the growing season, the summer growing season, they're done. They're not really interested in growing broccoli or whatever, garlic or whatever through the winter months. And you got to know that. So if you are not going to use your plot, what do you do with it in the winter? Are you just going to clear it? Are you going to have them plant a cover crop? Or however you want to handle it. Just know that even though some of us are so enthusiastic we want to grow food all year round, most community gardeners are tired and they don't want to do that. You can actually have special areas that are set aside for those types of things. So if you decide you want to grow watermelons, then maybe you are assigned a plot that's on the perimeter, maybe special plots. Another thing you can do is have a community area where maybe you want to donate to the food bank. Well, let's specify 3 or 4 plots, and then as a community, we work those plots, and then we rotate who takes that food. Or you love blueberries or strawberries, things that are really perennial crops. Maybe you set aside some areas for those things, and the community works them, you know, the community of gardeners, and then you share the fruit. Okay? It can be anything you want it to be, but you just have to specify and think about what you want. Once you have your garden rules, you need to develop your garden contract. And that contract is what everyone signs that decides to be in your community garden. And this is an example of a simple one. The garden manager is the highest governing authority at whatever your community garden name is. Breaking any rules, terms, or conditions is cause for exclusion from the garden and loss of your plot and forfeit of your payment. You'll receive one verbal warning. In 1 week, if no response or correction has been made, you will receive a written notice 2 weeks later. After 2 additional weeks, you're out. And then you attach your garden rules to that. Very simple. It basically just says we're here to be serious about this and we want you there. We want you to be part of it, but you're going to have to obey the rules, and if not, this is what happens. And then they sign it and the garden manager signs it and dates it. Your garden can be anything you want it to be. You need rules. You need a garden manager and maybe a committee of gardeners. The very first thing is to be organized with the people part. And then everybody can learn how to grow tomatoes correctly and how to grow squash and have fun events and that type of thing.